Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Wade, aka Professor Noctis, and we are so excited today because Magic the Gathering's Final Fantasy crossover event is here. And we have decided that in all the myriad of content that we are going to be giving this summer, we wanted to do something about Magic the Gathering. A couple weeks ago, Evan and I went to PAX East up in Boston, and I had my first experience of Magic the Gathering. I was not a player, and then I became a player because of Final Fantasy, and that's what we're trying to do with all of you. So, here's the thing. I'm an expert in Final Fantasy, and so we brought in the big guns, Barrett-sized guns, because I needed a Magic expert. So, Evan and I are delighted to bring onto the show today a Magic the Gathering savant, a guy that just is our resident expert and also a really close friend of ours, Nick Smith. So, introducing Nick. How are you, man?
I'm doing well. I think you've greatly oversold my Magic abilities, but we'll take it. We'll play it as
You are
life.
the only prof Magic that we have, and so you're going to be a...
You're both the hero that we need and the hero that we deserve.
Listen, I'm happy to be of service. Longtime friend, first time caller.
But not really a first-time caller, I guess, because you've been a part of the show in a very subtle way, right? If you've heard Evan say...
You may know him from such phrases as, and we want to thank Nick for our graphics, and it's right on the credits of almost every episode. We thank this Nick. So this is the Nick from the end credits who does all of the graphics and makes everything look so wonderful. So thank you for all of that, and thank you for being here with us today.
That's right.
It's a genuine pleasure. I'm very excited.
The Nick Smith. So today we have a task, and that task is to dive into Magic the Gathering, and specifically to dive into the Commander decks. A lot of people are picking up these decks because they've got your favorite games, Final Fantasy 7, 10, 14, or 6. And we're trying to make sense of these decks. I love all of the games equally, right? Because you can't choose among your children. But these decks may have different enjoyers depending on the play style of people. And so we're going to get into all of that today. Now, as I already mentioned, I'm the Final Fantasy guy. I'm here for the lore. I'm excited about looking at the art and kind of talking about the story of all this stuff. Nick is going to be today our Magic expert. So he's going to tell us what cards are cool from a play standpoint, a game standpoint, all that kind of stuff. And Evan is he's going to mediate between us. So that's the goal.
Just in case things get heated.
Just in case things get heated.
Okay.
And I'm like, no, Celis is the best. And he's like, well, actually, the card means maybe she's not. So we'll see.
Well, we'll get to it. And then a big part of it as well is we want you to be able to be informed consumers. And so whether you're just collecting the cards or whether you're interested in playing the decks, we want you to have an overview of what you can expect, what's in the box, what the format that it's made for is, and so you can have a little bit more information before you set out on your cardboard purchasing journey.
That's such an elegant way of saying it. It is a journey. And it was a journey for me. I mean, buying the decks and stuff, I was like going into an unknown world, a foreign land, because I was like, I don't know anything about anything. I think cards are cool. And I've kind of shared this already, but when I walked into the card shop, I was like, hi, I'm here for Magic cards, but I'm a Final Fantasy fan, and I have no idea what I'm buying. And you could see the soul drain from these people. Like, I mean, like their spirits went to the live stream immediately, which they wouldn't even understand because they don't understand Final Fantasy. I was like, I don't know. I guess it went to the graveyard, whatever. Anyway,
You've learned so much.
I've learned so much.
I'm so proud of you.
So anyway, why don't we go ahead and get into it? Evan, I'm going to kind of hand over some hosting responsibilities to you because I'm just here to love Final Fantasy, man.
Okay, everybody. So here's where we're going to go. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about the format that you would use these cards in. We'll talk about what's in the box and why it matters, why it's important. And then we're going to go through each of the 4 decks that are these pre-made decks. Now, the format of these decks is for a type of game that you can play with Magic the Gathering called Commander. Okay? So you just have to remember, these are Commander decks. Now, Nick, my understanding with these Commander decks is that this is a format where you have 100 cards and they're all unique. And you have one special card that operates as your commander that has special rules. So you're basically building an army with like a hero or a general, and all the cards kind of work together to defeat your opponents. Now, for those of us who may have never played Magic before and have no idea what that means, how close is that, and what is the significance of this being a commander deck compared to other formats that we won't need to discuss today?
Well, Commander really captures the most base unit of Magic, which is sitting around the kitchen table with your friends and playing Magic. No specific rules, no whatever. Commander has some specific rules, but it's a lot more freeform. It's multiplayer as opposed to 1v1. So you and a couple of your friends can get all the decks, sit around, play together instead of playing individually. And it allows a little more breathing room because the game's a little slower. They go longer. So you get to see more of your deck. You get to play more of your cards. You find yourself in more contrived and convoluted situations because instead of it just being me versus my opponent, it's me versus my opponent and then my other two opponents who sometimes become your friends depending on what you need.
Okay. So is it a max of 4? Okay. Same question. Great.
Great question. So officially, yes. But like a lot of things, Commander grew out of tournament organizers and judges playing in their downtime together. So it's a community created format that became the most popular format in Magic in the past couple years. So there are versions you can play with more. There are additional rule sets that have been community made that vary. If you played games like Mafia or Bang, there are versions of those that have been reskinned into Commander to accommodate larger numbers because the game can get pretty complicated, especially when you start adding more and more players past 4 is recommended.
Oh my gosh.
Strong recommendation for 4, but you can go, I've played up to 7. Okay. And the game changes pretty dramatically. And so there are all sorts of different ways you can kind of nudge the rules here and there to accommodate that. But it's flexible. You can play with 3. If you only have 3, no problem.
Okay.
You can do 1v1 with Commander.
That's really cool because I thought that you could only play 4. Like not 3, not 5 or anything. So there's some adaptability there. We may have to do other videos about that.
Well, we will. So just to restate, so it's a unique format that is community created originally, which I think is very, very cool. That Magic as a game is they just set the rules and give you some cards, and the creativity that you want to bring into your play experience, you get to do. Not in just the way that you build your decks, but in also the format and how you play the game. So I think that is something that's worth pointing out with Magic is that there's a lot of flexibility to the ways that you can enjoy this game, Commander being one of them, and so much so that they decided to make 4 pre-made decks, so you don't have to do any work but buy the decks, and you open them up, and then you can start playing Commander. So what we're going to start focusing on is what's unique about each of these decks. If you're looking at choosing to buy some of these decks, who is this deck going to be for, and what kind of play experience would you have with Magic the Gathering to then be able to enjoy these decks? So 100 cards feels like a lot. How do you keep track of them all?
Practice, and also part of the joy of Commander is playing 5 or 10 games and just never seeing that one card you were really excited about because it got lost in your deck somewhere. And when you shuffle 100 cards, sometimes somewhere on the bottom. And it's less likely, but when you do it multiple times, they may just stay on the bottom. You never know.
But your Commander is always available to you. That's what's special about this format is that it's 100 cards plus your Commander. So when we talk about some of these Commanders, that's a pretty important distinction. Wade, I'm curious from your perspective, 100 cards, a special Commander, what needs to be clarified at this point for the Final Fantasy fan approaching this video for the first time?
I mean, the way that I kind of think about it is, all of these games have a primary protagonist, and that protagonist is in some ways the commander of the entire party. Now, they may be a reluctant leader and they may have a time away from it, but they are kind of the central one. I think that we're going to get into some of these dynamics a little bit later on, but the more that you talk about it, it kind of reminds me, Nick, there's a game, Final Fantasy Tactics, which is very much like, just an overview, sort of like a you're a general, basically, sending out your troops, and that's what this really feels like. A little bit different than the Magic Arena sort of thing. A lot more, I guess, players and cards and characters in play. So,
yeah, part of the reason Commander got so popular is because you choose a commander to build around. It allows for a lot more direct personalization.
Interesting.
So, like the decks I own and play are pretty unique to me. I've built them myself. The commanders play the game the way I like to play. But there's a million options out there. And obviously with the Final Fantasy decks, there are 4 precons that are all ready to go. They're all very different in how they play. And kind of scratch different itches depending on what you like in games, depending on how you like to fight in games, if you like to be up front, if you like to be in the back, different types of things like that.
Okay, so
I have one other question. So I've heard people talk about making decks. And one of the things that people have asked me is like, can I make a commander deck and stuff? And like my immediate thought is that's too advanced for me. I don't really want to get into that. But Nick, is it possible to make your own commander deck? And with these pre-made ones, would you suggest that?
So it absolutely is possible. There are going to be, there's more to learn if you want to go that route. But there are also a lot of Final Fantasy cards in the set that are not in these decks. And so there's more you can, if you even just want to stay purely in the Final Fantasy lane, there are changes you can make to these out of the box using cards you'll open booster packs that might be really good, that just aren't in this specific pre-made list. Wizards of the Coast likes to give a kind of set power level for pre-con decks to keep them mostly in line with each other to help people have as good of an experience as possible. So there's some complexity, but there's never too much. Because Magic can be complicated, and these products are really designed so people can buy, open them up, and play, and not just be completely lost and have no idea what they're doing.
That's my speed. That's what I want.
Yeah. So these products are designed so that someone can just open the box and play and be pretty quickly brought up to speed is kind of important. Let's talk about a few terms that you shared that I want to make sure folks are caught up for. So you said these are 4 pre-con decks. Tell us what a pre-con deck is and why it's distinct from building your own deck.
So pre-con is short for pre-constructed. So that means this list is put together by the people at Wizards or whoever. And then every box that has, for example, Counter Blitz, every Counter Blitz deck is the exact same coming out of the box. So there's no variance in there, unlike with a booster pack where it's going to be randomized cards, could be anything. Every box with every one of these commander decks comes out identical. And one of the big differences with this versus a kind of player-built deck is it's a lot less work, which is nice. It has an MSRP, which that's a whole nother, we could do years of content on the ecosystem of finance and Magic because it's complicated. So it's nice sometimes people just buy a thing. I know I can play it. I know I'm gonna have a good time with it. I don't need, I gotta go spend this on this card and I gotta buy a bunch of these and all this kind of stuff. Being able to have a product that's just like packaged, ready to go and is fun, is a real value add. I'm a deck builder. I love to put things together. I have probably 100 to 150 deck lists that I've built, just where it's like I got to get ideas out.
What you have is a problem.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The only saving grace is that I haven't actually built them, so I still own my house and I have money and I can pay the bills. But Magic can get pretty expensive when you get into the deep end, and so you have to learn where your limits are on restraint and
Nick,
collecting and all that kind of stuff.
I have a personal question, but I feel like people may want to know, and we can edit it out if it's too personal. But how much money is your Magic set worth?
You don't ask.
I'm not shy about that.
I'm just curious.
Maybe I'll put it in the video so people don't break into my house. But. Ballpark right now, it's a little out of date. Grand.
He has a separate insurance writer just for his Magic cards. That's all you need to know.
That's what you need to know. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
We should bleep it.
We should.
Yeah. Yeah, if you want to, that'd be funny.
That would be hilarious. All right.
Put a little
Well,
chocobo
if you're coming in after I've bleeped out the dollar amount of his magic deck, welcome
But
back.
whenever I mouse it, I can't read my lips. Just
Oh yeah, I will. I definitely will.
I love that.
So these pre-constructed decks are one of the easiest ways to know exactly what you should be spending, open the box, and begin playing the game with your friends. So I think that's important to know. Another note, when he says Wizards or Wizards of the Coast, that is the publisher of the game. So
Thank you for saying that.
When
I
we talk
was
about,
like,
yeah,
who are these wizards?
we're going to be talking about Wizards, but in this context, we're talking about Wizards of the Coast, which
Look, I
are...
missed that card. I'm a Final Fantasy fan. I don't remember Wizards on the Coast.
Okay, so we're gonna shift gears and start talking about each of these 4 pre-constructed or pre-con decks here. There's important things to know about the way that Magic cards tell the story of the characters and their abilities in the game and how it impacts game mechanics. Wade, you know the stories of all these characters, but tell us a little bit in how you've been talking with Nick, how you've started to learn about how the card and what it does can tell the story. And I'd be interested to hear, Nick, from your perspective, what it's been like to talk to Wade about it too. But Wade, kick us off.
This has been a really cool thing because, like, some collaborations are just like slap the property onto the product and call it a day and make bank. But it is clear that the Wizards of the Coast have decided to really go all in on this one. And I love it because the cards have an element of telling the story of the character and conveying the story of the game. There's even a theory crafting community that I'm a part of with Final Fantasy VII Remake, Rebirth, and whatever it is, where we're looking at the Sephiroth card trying to deduce what's coming next because so many of these cards are really telling a cool story from this. And so we're going to get into some of that stuff, especially with the Commander deck. But I've just been shocked at the amount of love and extra attention. They were going to make bank on this collaboration. The fact that they are taking this extra care really, it makes me smile. Like I just love that.
yeah, it was a big to do when Magic announced that they would be folding in these external IPs. It's called Universes Beyond. So if you ever see that, that's kind of their flavorful way of saying we're bringing in Lord of the Rings or Fallout or Final Fantasy or Assassin's Creed. You can even get SpongeBob cards if you want. They're Magic players can be pretty deeply entrenched, and I've been playing the game since 1995, maybe. Not to date myself too much, but so I've had cards that are older than people I know, which is weird. But Magic players can be a little stuck in their ways. And what I will say to their credit, all of these sets that they've brought in external things, external IPs on, have been mechanically brilliant. The way that they tell the story of that show or movie or video game in and through the mechanics of Magic is I've talked to people who really hate the Universe Beyond, but they're mad because some of the cards are really cool and interesting and well done that it makes them angry. So I didn't want to like it. I wanted to be angry about it. But like all hobbies, most people just exist to be grappled about their thing.
That never happens in the Final Fantasy community. We are very pure.
The Magic community and the Final Fantasy community maybe were made for each other.
That's why we needed a mediator for this.
This is going to be perfect.
We were afraid it was going off rails. Gatekeeper to gatekeeper here.
Like you experienced at the card shop, Magic can be pretty extremely gatekeeping, but it's also card shops are the Wild West in a lot of ways, where you roll into one and they can smell the lack of Magic player on you, and they just ice you out. But then you have other ones that are just amazing. The one I go to in my town is an awesome and super welcoming, super inviting community. Sometimes you have to try a couple shops, see which one fits your vibe. But all that to say, the mechanics of these cards, I have learned more about Final Fantasy than I knew, because my Final Fantasy experience is pretty limited. Tactics advance. 13, and then Final Fantasy 14. That's pretty much it for me.
Wow.
So
Did you beat Tactics Advance?
I did, and then I played the second one.
Okay.
I never played the original Tactics, but I love that kind of strategy game. So
Well,
obviously Magic is a
depending on what goes down at the State of Play and Summer Games Fest, a Tactics remaster may be in the cards. Okay.
now that I'm interested.
Fingers crossed.
Stay
big
tuned,
fan.
buddy. Stay tuned.
So
I'm locked
we're
in.
going to discuss each of these decks now, and the point is to give you an idea of kind of what it does, who the main characters are, and then what type of deck you may want to play. I know that many of you are probably you already bought all four. They had the pictures of the characters that you wanted, and you just bought all four. So great. We're going to tell you kind of maybe which one you could open first, which one you could recommend to your friends. But if you're uncertain about what you want to buy, hopefully this is a good start to help you understand kind of what the deck wants to do, what kind of play experience you could have with your friends. And then if you know that a deck might not be for you, it might give you a good idea of which of your friends you could recommend to get the deck. Because you've bought all four, and you need 3 other friends to play if you want to get to 4. So you can make some informed decisions, or you could send your friend this video and have them watch it and see which deck they maybe want to play. So that's the nature of what we're going to do here. We kind of jump in. So there are 4 commander decks that we're going to go over, okay? And so they each cover a specific one of the Final Fantasy games. Wade, will you just tell us a little bit about what is significant about each deck containing only characters from that specific game and kind of how it keeps you engaged with the story?
Yeah, so the 4 games that are represented are Final Fantasy 6, 7, 10, and 14. Final Fantasy 6, I think we're going to start with Final Fantasy 6 here. Final Fantasy 6 is called the Revival Trance deck. And this one really excites me. I was telling the guys a little bit before we started streaming this. This one excites me because this game has the largest party playable characters in the entire series. And so we've got all of these different characters in the game that you're trying to move and manipulate in order, especially in those final battles against Kefka and going through that final dungeon. You're having to really min-max all of your characters and their abilities. And to me, that's what Commander appears to be all about. Trying to figure out the best way to use your library and your full deck of cards in the most strategic way possible. This is something that to a degree you're going to get in like your regular like arena, like on if you're playing the mobile game. But in Commander, it really is much more than that. And so for me, Final Fantasy VI is the easiest transfer over to this. And so I'm really excited to get into that. 7, 10, and 14 have their own elements, and we're certainly going to get into all of those things. But 6 to me is the character deck.
Okay, well, I think I love starting with the character deck then, because we're going to be talking about notable characters. So we're going to be talking about the commander that is selected for each of these decks. The decks have a name that has a theme, and then there's one character that they recommend to be the commander. Now, spoiler, each of these decks has an alternate commander. Wade and I knew that before we started talking with Nick about it, but Nick finally caught us up. So we definitely knew that up until maybe a few days ago. But we're also going to be telling you the hidden lore about the alternate commanders and opportunities that are present in each of these decks. And Nick is going to help us unlock the hidden secrets of the magic side of it, and Wade is going to help us unlock the hidden secrets of the story side of it. So that being said, let's talk about Revival Trance, our first deck here. The commander is TERRA, Herald of Hope from Final Fantasy VI. Wade, before we get into who TERRA is and what the significance of that story is, you know what? Actually, I'm changing that back up. Tell us who TERRA is and what the significance is of that being the commander on this deck. And then Nick, we're going to talk afterwards about what the playstyle is, what kind of person might enjoy that. So if you're the kind of person that likes to know where we're headed to stay engaged, that's what we're going to talk about after that. So TERRA, who is TERRA and why do we care?
TERRA is awesome. First of all, when I played Final Fantasy VI, back then 3 on the Super Nintendo because different American numberings, I thought that the main character of Final Fantasy VI, because it's an ensemble cast, was a guy named Locke, because Locke is the one that I identified with the most. However, in my advanced years, I look back at that story and I say TERRA is really the main character of this game, making her the first female protagonist of a Final Fantasy game, the first primary protagonist that's a female in the game, in series. So with this particular one, TERRA is is someone who is known for her magical abilities, but she's an outcast the entire time. She really tries to shield those abilities. She doesn't know why she has those abilities, and this entire game is a story of self-discovery where she begins to realize that not only does she have magic abilities, but she is part Esper, which means that she is one of these monsters that you're able to summon in a lot of these games. She is kind of the product of parents, one Esper, one human. And so she serves as this bridge between two very foreign worlds. And so her resolve of self-discovery and rebuilding after the worst things in life happen, learning to control those powers, is kind of this symbol of hope for every other character in Final Fantasy VI. They see her as this herald of hope, because if she can do this thing, then we can follow her into battle. She's like our ace card, you know? And so it's not surprising to me that she is the commander in this, because she is such a symbol of hope for the resistance groups in the game.
Okay, so we're going to talk now about how the way that you play the cards based on the rules and the abilities on them kind of impacts some of that story. Now, we've done a little bit of pre-show, so Nick has helped us to understand some basics about these decks already. So I'm going to give you kind of the key, simple version of what this deck likes to do, and then Nick can explain the mechanics, and I'll reiterate it again so that you can kind of hear it, because this is a lot of information, and that's kind of the point. So, Nick, you said that because of this deck and because of TERRA as the commander, this is the type of deck that likes combat, it likes to fight, it needs to fight, you need to spawn combat, and that when it does fight, it becomes stronger and stronger until you overwhelm your opponent. So knowing what we know about the story of TERRA and some of these card abilities, what type of deck is this from a Magic terminology sense, and how does the way that it plays connect with the story that Wade just said?
Yeah, so in Magic terms, this would probably be most easily described as a reanimator deck. So the idea that TERRA is like able to maybe not necessarily control her magic at the beginning really ties into the card. So she does her primary effects only in certain situations, only when certain conditions are met. So she needs to attack and deal damage, and when she does, then that lets her pull cards out of the graveyard and bring them back into play, which ties in too with some of the larger party and play in six, because a vast majority of those characters are at the correct power level for her to bring. So the idea that she can save her party members over and over sounds pretty in line with some of her thematic role as this kind of bridge between two worlds.
That's very cool. Okay,
yeah.
So I'll restate it. So she is able to lead her friends and her characters into combat, and even if they fall, she has the ability to go take them out of the graveyard where you put a character when it has fallen, and you can reanimate them and bring them back in different ways. So if they don't die, then no problem. But if they do, this deck is specifically tuned and designed around her ability to go fetch them from the grave itself to then fight again against your opponent.
That's correct.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, so then before we get some feedback on that, Nick, what type of player would enjoy this kind of deck? Like, what kind of person might like playing this deck?
This is going to be a great option for someone who likes a little more in your face of a role in a game, who likes to maybe push the tempo, a little more aggressive. This is not a deck that's really going to work at all if you sit on your heels the whole time. This wants to attack and push the tempo and make people make hard decisions, because even if you block my creatures and killed them, TERRA's ability lets me get them back. So it really puts people into a pretty tough spot when it's, do I let the damage through, or do I sacrifice my creature to stop this attack? But then that doesn't really stop them, because she's just going to yank them back out of the graveyard and bring them back to the fight immediately anyway.
That is so interesting. In Final Fantasy VI, this is the only game in the series where you lose halfway through the game. Okay? Like, Kefka wins, and then the second half of the game, you start out as Celis, and then it really ramps up when you reunite with TERRA. And you are then trying to regather all of your companions. So you literally come back from the utter devastation of the entire world. It's called the World of Ruin, as a matter of fact. And you're journeying through it to really go in and face off against Kefka. That's really cool. I love that.
Like I was saying, they've done their homework. These kind of fusions of two very different IPs are done
So
with
cool.
with a lot of love, and like I know the people who headed up the Final Fantasy cards are serious Final Fantasy lovers. So it's
Awesome.
it's fun to, like, for me to start talking about it and see things connect for you and vice versa. As you're describing some of the lore, I'm like, oh yeah, this totally all fits together like very nicely, thematically, which is really cool.
That's awesome. And then it also goes into one of the other cards, Celis, as well, right? When the world is destroyed, you wake up in the World of Ruin as Celis on this lonely, deserted island. It's just you and one other person, a guy named Sid, who's iconic in all of the games. But she then has to go on this journey of regathering. And it's interesting to look at her card because, correct me if I'm wrong here, she's the secondary commander in this deck. And we know that why.
So every pre-con deck that Magic has made, at least for a long time, to my knowledge, there is usually an alternate commander, a secret commander, that has the same color in the card. So, for example, because TERRA is a red, white, and black creature, every card in her deck, per the rules of Commander, has to be red, white, black, or some combination of those three.
Okay.
And so Celis is the only other red, white, black creature. And since a commander has to be a creature, by proxy, she's the only other one who would be capable of leading this commander deck as is.
That makes great sense with the game because she is the one that ends up leading in the second half of the game until you really find TERRA. Then you get the whole band back together. I think that my question here, just as the novice around here, why is having a secondary commander important? Like, what do you do with a secondary commander?
I like secret commanders personally.
Secret commander. I like that too.
Secret, this is inspired, like, this is an aside, but there are people who build decks around cards that are not in the command slot. So I have a deck I've been tinkering with for some amount of time that runs a actual secret commander. So when I sit down at a table, I put my commander on the table and everyone sees it. That's not who the deck is about.
It's a trick?
That person, it's a trick. That person is there to enable me to get my secret commander, which then is what the actual deck is about. So you can get really into it. But with the precons, the whole point is that it gives you two versions of the same deck, because the nature of a commander means they're almost always accessible to you as a player.
Okay.
So normally, if I don't draw a card, it's hard for me to see what it does in a game. But since the commander exists in its own dedicated zone where I can always cast it from there, I can always send it back there. If it would die instead, I can put it back in the command zone so I have access to it again. It lets you change on a really fundamental level what the kind of loop of the deck is. Because TERRA is all about dealing combat damage as a means of bringing creatures back, but Celis is more about bringing things out of the graveyard, not in any specific way. She just wants things to be in the graveyard and then to pull them out, and then she gets more powerful. They get more powerful because of that. She's a bit, to glean off some of what you were saying lore-wise, she's the gatherer. She brings these things, it kind of pulls them back from the brink, and gets them ready to go again.
Okay, that's so cool. I love that.
I love the way that this paints the picture of the story and the deck and what it does, and helps us kind of understand how to play it. What are some other notable characters, Wade, that you would want to talk about before we jump into the next deck?
Well, we could definitely talk about the 14 permanent playable characters in Final Fantasy VI. I don't think we have time for that. Some of my favorites are Locke, the treasure hunter. I love it because he's got his move Mug. And so whenever Locke attacks, the card says each player mills a card. Now, what does mill mean?
So
I assume it's a mug. Do they mug?
Kind of. So milling in a card game, especially Magic, it is basically taking a card from your library and then putting it straight into your graveyard.
Oh,
So
okay.
kind of shredding off the top of a deck. In Magic, when you run out of cards in your library, if you can't draw, if it's empty, you just lose. So milling is kind of, some people get a little touchy if you mill them. There are entire strategies around milling someone out entirely. So it's like, instead of attacking you to lower your life to 0, if I just make you draw every card in your deck, you lose the game. So there's some different ways you can put pressure on people, but making everyone mill 1, basically Locke wants to put things in everyone's graveyard, and then because he's a treasure hunter, he's good at digging through forgotten places, you then can cast those cards, yours and your opponent's, that he mills.
Oh, that is awesome.
So he's
It's
mugging
very cool.
them. He's literally
He's
stealing
literally
them.
mugging.
Stealing their. Oh, that is
That's
And,
so
and on
cool.
top of that, if one of those cards is a land, he creates treasure tokens, which help him make more mana, and obviously treasure and treasure
What is a
hunter.
treasure
various of that.
token? Can you explain that for us real quick?
So a treasure token is basically, think of it like a capsule of mana.
Okay.
So normally with a land, you'd have to play a land and tap it, and that makes mana in Magic. But a treasure token is, you tap it, you sacrifice it, it gets destroyed, it ceases to exist, but it makes 1 mana of any color.
It's like
So
a water bottle.
Exactly. And it's particularly useful with Locke because when you're casting cards from other people's decks, like for example, if I mill someone, they have a green card I want to play, this deck can't make green mana, but the treasures can, because this deck's only red, white, and black. So if I don't have a forest that can make green mana, I can't cast it. That's where those treasures come in, and they help smooth it out, where he's able to use things that might be outside his traditional purview, and the kind of colors and theme of the deck.
This is a great plug for the fact that we're hoping to do a in-depth deck guide for each of these decks too, where we'll go more into strategy, look deeper at the different cards. So if that's something you're interested in, definitely let us know in the comments. And if you have any of these decks that you would want us to do a guide on first, we would love to know that, because we will probably determine which deck we do first based on what everybody wants and kind of where the voting stands. So make your voice heard in the comments and in the Discord if you would like for this to be the first deck. What other characters kind of stick out here, Wade, that you would want to talk about?
Well, I think that for most of the Six fans out there, we need to talk about Kefka. Kefka is the iconic villain, and really he's almost like a jester and a henchman for the first half of the game, until he's the one that enacts the full destruction of the world, enacting the world
just
of
that.
ruin, right? Just no big deal. But he
Light work.
becomes this iconic figure at the end, who is godlike, and he lives at the top of this tower called Kefka Tower, because of course he named it after himself. And then from there, he is just ruling, and he shoots down this like annihilation ray on entire cities that don't subject to his authority, right? They don't bow down to him. And so he is the judge, the jury, and the executioner all in one. And so that's why these resistors, the party that you play as, are going up against him. He is one of the most iconic villains in the entire series, and has one of the best theme songs ever. It's called Dancing Mad, and it's about 12 minutes long. There's 4 movements to the song, and it kind of escalates as you go up to different phases of this fight. It's absolutely stunning. So if you haven't checked those things out, make sure you do it. It's on Spotify and Apple Music. But free plug there. But the card itself, I just love it because it says, during your turn, Kefka has indestructible, which means I assume that he can't be killed.
He can't be destructible.
He can't be destructed. Great. At the beginning of your end step, exile a card at random from each opponent's graveyard. This is where I love Kefka, but I have no idea what that means.
Yeah, what does it mean, Nick?
Based on the mechanics of this card and what you've told me, Kefka's a little bit nuts.
Okay, fair. He is.
So typically, that in Magic is often represented in chance. So instead of like at the beginning of the end step, I get to cast a card from your graveyard, I don't get to choose which are my choices there, right? It's at randomly determined. You roll a die, you number them like 1 through whatever, and then roll a die.
Oh, so that's an extra step here. You need to roll a die when it says at random.
Any way to determine random, that's the most common, because typically somebody at the table will have a die and you can just go like 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, 6 as a reroll.
That's really helpful for me to know, because I would have been like at random, like shut my eyes and point.
You can also like turn them over, shuffle, have someone shuffle and fan them out for you. There's a lot of ways to do it, but
that's cool.
Especially if you're playing with strangers, the die rolling, it will usually be the most common.
I just think of me and another new player. It's like, well, how do we determine what is random, what's within bounds? So that's really helpful. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah. So he basically, the card that's telling me he's an extremely powerful mage who's maybe lost some of his grip on reality. Is that a fair statement?
So accurate. That is like so accurate. I love that.
Yeah, he gets to play spells for free, which is usually very strong. Not having to pay the mana cost means you just can rip off some crazy things.
Oh, that's awesome.
But not necessarily having your pick of the litter on those. You just get these 3 at random, and then you can use them. Or maybe they don't really work here. Maybe they're not useful. Maybe it's kind of a dud. But that's sort of the chance that he's taking.
I love that. So Kefka is like, that's a very coveted card, I would imagine. That's cool.
Yeah, very cool.
I think that's probably a good preview on this one, and I think it's probably about time to move on to our next deck. Because this is the first one we're wrapping up, any other final thoughts on this one? Going once, going twice. Okay.
The only thing I'll say, I'm so excited. I'm so excited about this deck because of the way that it just integrates with the story. The idea of being that, again, TERRA, Herald of Hope, is just like, that's the story of Final Fantasy VI. And every time I use this deck, I'm going to be reenacting that. That's so freaking cool, and I love it. So
I love it. Those are great closing thoughts. I'm going to have you do closing thoughts on all of them now, because that was a nice benediction to move on.
It's going to be the same every time.
the deck on Final Fantasy VII, you're going to say, I'm so excited because it involves TERRA from Final Fantasy.
I get to play as TERRA, the Herald of Hope again.
This is perfect. So let's talk about the next deck, and I need everybody to stay in their chairs, okay? So the next deck is called Limit Break. The next deck is called Limit Break, and this is the Final Fantasy VII deck.
7!
Which you have a little bit of experience with here, Wade. Let's talk about Final Fantasy VII and Limit Break deck. Why did they call it the Limit Break deck? What's the significance there? And our Commander Cloud X Soldier. Tell us about it, Wade.
Final Fantasy VII is the story of Cloud Strife. He is, as it says on the card, ex-soldier. He is a mercenary, and the game starts out with him just doing another job. But you find out throughout the story of Final Fantasy VII that there is a larger crisis looming, rather than just a mercenary getting his pay. It begins with the evil corporation Shinra that is sucking the life out of the planet, quite literally, turning it into power. And then that has collateral damage because the energy they are sapping from the planet is known as the life stream, which is kind of this ethereal sort of thing where souls live and memories of all existence live. And so they're actually taking away the collective memory of the planet. What ensues through this is a journey through Cloud's mind and his own psyche, his social and parasocial relationships with the world around him, and the mimetic legacy of those that have come before him. Okay. It is important to note that none of that was scripted. I was doing that straight from the heart. That is how I know this game. Of course, there is the iconic villain known as Sephiroth, who is maybe the most iconic villain in all of Final Fantasy. And Sephiroth is what begins as a fallen soldier ends up being one on par with God, which sounds pretty similar to the other Final Fantasy games that we will be discussing.
There's a lot of God involved.
This game is iconic for a lot of reasons. But the biggest one is because it put JRPGs, Japanese role-playing games, into the mainstream. With Final Fantasy VII and the advent of the PlayStation 1 system, you got the most cinematic representation in video games ever. Okay, up to that point. And it set a new standard for what RPGs could be. And that's why this story is so beloved. And it's the reason why Square Enix has made a 3-part remake of this game. 3rd part soon to be released one day, hopefully.
That's perfect. Thank you for setting the stage. Nick, you described to me that this deck is one where Cloud likes to build his arsenal to rally all of the troops and your comrades, and that the bigger that your characters get, the harder they hit and the better that you do. And you also told me to remind you that there's significance in the number 7 in the way that all of these things build up in this deck for Final Fantasy VII. So once again, this deck likes to build up an arsenal, rally your troops and friends, and the bigger that they get, the harder that they hit and the better that you do. Nick, tell us what kind of deck this is and how the mechanics contribute to the story that Wade just introduced to us.
Yeah, so there's kind of 2 threads to pull out here. The first is more of a meta structure, if you will. The 7 theme is just referential to the game title. My understanding, I don't think the number 7 is specifically relevant in the actual story of Final Fantasy VII.
So either.
So this is kind of we're doubling down because 7 is, I have played very few Final Fantasy games. I know a lot about 7 just because like I exist in games and the internet and
Smash
stuff.
Brothers. I get it.
It is a cultural touchstone, whether you've played it or not. But beyond that, number 7 kind of being relevant, it's all about Cloud gearing up, getting stronger, getting the crew together, and then leading an attack. So it's a deck for people who like to do big hits, maybe not the fastest moving, likes to do some growing, put some roots down a little bit, build your resources in the right way, and then unleash all hell.
It sounds a lot like a limit break, which is the title of the deck. Wade, you want to give us a little context on how that contributes to the name of the deck and how it relates to the game?
In the game, the video game, the characters have what's called a limit break meter or a limit meter. And this slowly begins to fill when you receive attacks from opponents. And as the gauge fills, eventually it's going to get all the way to the end, and you will be able to unleash a very special, high-powered attack that usually, depending on your level, is going to take down all of the battlefield there. And so limit breaks are highly coveted, they're highly sought after, and sometimes you will play the game so that you can get hit enough so that you can then use that limit break and unleash that power. I'm not surprised at all that this would be called the limit break deck, simply because it is about power, right? And charging up so that you can unleash. One other interesting thing that you said there, Nick, is that you are trying to build up your characters, you're trying to build up your party. The whole deal in Final Fantasy VII is that Cloud has, to a degree, a fractured psyche, a fractured mind. And throughout the game, through relationships and even through a journey into the life stream and his own inner subconscious, Cloud reassimilates all of the disparate, fractured parts of his psyche and comes out self-actualized, whole, ready to unleash some real damage. So, I don't know if that conveys any of this deck, but to me, that's what I would be expecting.
Yeah, Nick, you said the type of person that might like this deck is somebody who likes to be a little patient, charge up their attacks, and then unleash very big attacks and strikes on their opponents. Tell us a little bit about how the deck mechanics contribute to that.
Yeah, so this deck runs a lot of equipment. So different types of swords, boots, shields, helmets, all kinds of different gear that your characters can equip. And that will give them new abilities, raise their stats, all sorts of different fun, weird little interactions. So those will contribute towards getting towards that like lucky number 7 for once our power's 7 or greater, we do extra things with Cloud. But it also, we've got like the iconic Hero's Blade, which is the Buster Sword in there. We've got Sword of the Animus. Looks like maybe Aerith has got some sort of spear type deal. So all these kind of different tools in the toolkit that will modify how the character attacks, how it deals damage, what sort of benefits you get from doing that, what sort of protections they have. So it's really about kind of assembling your crew and then getting the right gear on the right person to put them in the best case scenario for their attack to endure whatever's coming your way, whatever it may be.
So setting up big attacks, having characters that are strong on their own, but then when you give them the right equipment and you kind of get them in the right position on the battlefield to strike the weakness that an opponent has, or you buff up their strength enough, then they can do that. I think that makes a lot of sense for how you manage your party and how the combat works in Final Fantasy VII as well. Wade, let's talk about the alternate or secret commander here. Nick has given us the tools to be able to identify what the secret commander is for this deck. Do you want to take a crack at it?
So if we're looking for 3 of the same, or 3 elements, I guess, am I using that right? 3 elements?
3 colors, really.
3 colors. Okay.
Simple, nothing too fancy.
See, I would call it 3 materia. But anyway, 3 colors. We're going to go with Tifa Martial Artist.
Okay.
That's okay. So that's a choice. That's a choice.
Why is that?
I don't want to say things that are bad, but it is interesting that Cloud and Tifa are the commander and secret or secondary commander. For those that don't know, there is a real discussion about who does Cloud love, and it is a bunch of people think it's Tifa, and a bunch of people think it is Aerith. But Aerith she has 2 colors here, and Tifa has 3. I don't know if that matters. There's groups of people that could fight over this, and I think I just gave them some ammunition. So put that in your Barrett gun arm and shoot them.
So we'll let everybody discuss that on their own time.
On your own. I'm not getting into that, but that is an interesting choice there.
So
but it makes sense. I will say this. It does make sense because there is a sequence of time when Cloud falls into the live stream. We're going to find this out in the part 3 of Remake, whatever it's called. I think it's Reclaim or Return. Anyway, he falls into the live stream and Tifa takes over the party. So when Cloud is out of commission, Tifa steps up. And I think that is a really interesting narrative move, regardless of shipping. For this particular.
For those of you who don't know, shipping is the relationship portion of the fandom that like to talk about who goes into relationships with other people. Yeah. We won't discuss that much more in this video, but
the way it's about the cards.
It's about the cards.
It's not in the cards.
Not to waylay us too much, but there's a mechanic in Magic called Partner. That if 2 cards have Partner, they can both be a commander jointly.
How would you activate that? For those that would be interested in shipping these 2.
Sure, hypothetically. So it's printed on the cards. So maybe this is a tacit non-endorsement of Cloud and Tifa, since they don't have Partner. Wizards of the Coast, and by proxy, perhaps Square Enix, are leaving it up to us to decide who the official pair is.
Oh, interesting.
But they could have printed partners with Tifa Martial Artist or something similar.
They could have, but they did.
They could have, but they didn't. It's interesting.
Choose your own adventure, friends.
Mm-hmm.
Well, cardboard burns brightly, but not very long. So we've added some bright but brief fuel to the fire for the shipping wars that will ensue. So there you go. If you're into that, congratulations. You've consumed enough of our mental space that we decided to talk about it as much as we did. So Tifa is our secret commander here, knowing that the deck likes to distribute equipment and charge up your characters, and it's for people who like to do strategic strikes and build up big attacks over time. Let's talk about the general identity, Nick. What else is noticeable, or would you want to let someone know if they're considering the Limit Break deck? And then we'll jump into other characters or cards that we want to make sure get mentioned in this game. But what else, Nick, is noticeable about this deck and the fact that they decided to call it Limit Break that you would want folks to be aware of?
Yeah, it's a deck that's all about steady progress. I think it really mirrors the XP curve of a JRPG. Where it's just the character alone isn't enough, but you need time and to develop your resources to get them the right spells and gear and equipment to really get them online. And when you do, they become pretty overwhelming pretty quickly. Like Tifa and Cloud both, when you meet that 7 power threshold, the game changes kind of fundamentally for the player. You go from being someone with, oh, you got like a nice scary board, to being like this person's about to take over the game in a hurry.
When you say board, a scary board, what does that mean in the context of this game?
Yeah, so in card games, you'll hear someone talk about their board or the board state. Basically, that just says the creatures you have in play, the things that are out in front of you, that are on the battlefield, that are taking part in the game. Because you also have your cards in your hand, but those are secret information most of the time. So that's kind of a harder to strategize around. But what you can see out in front of you, especially in Commander, because you have not just one opponent, but you have three, the board state can get pretty complicated because everyone's doing their own thing. Everyone's playing creatures and making them stronger and growing their power. And it's all happening in parallel. And so you have to kind of figure out, okay, how do I navigate through this?
I have a logistical question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and like, because we just keep throwing this out, I feel like it's a good time to ask it, especially as we talk about multiple commanders and all that kind of stuff. You start with a commander, right? Like here, I would start with Cloud. He would already be out of the deck, or do I have to draw him?
So he exists basically in his own little space. So there's a place called the Command Zone, that is not in play, but is accessible to you.
Okay.
So you don't need to draw him, but for his mana cost, which is 5, 1 green, 1 white, 1 red, and 2 of any color, you can then play him from the Command Zone directly into play. So he's always accessible. And then anytime he would leave the battlefield, if someone destroys him, if someone would send him back to your hand or make him go shuffle into your library, if he would ever leave play, you can instead redirect him to the Command Zone.
Okay, so
at your choice.
That was my next question. Can he die and go to the graveyard? So he can, but you can choose not to and put him in the Command Zone. Why would you do that?
So there are certain decks that care about the graveyard. Like, for example, the Revival Trance deck can use the graveyard pretty easily. So sometimes sending your commander there isn't really a barrier at all.
Interesting.
And anytime they go back to the Command Zone, they incur what's called the Commander Tax. So the next time I play Cloud, I have to pay his mana cost as normal, but then for every time I've cast him from the Command Zone, I have to add 2 colorless mana.
Okay.
So I have to keep his cost will increase. So every time your commander goes back, it costs a little bit more to bring out. It's not a barrier necessarily, but obviously over time that adds up pretty quick.
Can I ask another question? How would you know that from this card?
From the card? That is a commander rule specifically.
Oh, it's commander rule specific. Okay.
Yeah.
For the general... go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go ahead.
I was just going to say, for the general viewer, there's a lot of specific rules and interactions for this game mode that, because you can go watch a tutorial for what this game mode is, we're not covering all of them. Yeah. But as they come up and become necessary for clarity to understand the story and to kind of understand the basic shape of the deck, we're introducing them, because it's not really a tutorial video, but we have to mention those rules because we're just sitting here going, wait, what? So when you see our eyes glaze over, we are going to take the time to allow our resident expert to instruct us.
Well, that's just really helpful, because, I don't know, I feel like I'm probably the guy that is like many of our viewers of like, that sounds awesome, but how would I know that? And so that's really helpful. So, finding a tutorial video, or maybe there's like some instructions in the deck. I don't have them yet. Like they come out later on. So
that's part of the challenge and part of why we wanted to take the time to have these discussions, because you can watch a video like this, listen to our discussion, and then have a more informed approach to purchasing or collecting or playing the game in itself. So I think that's great context.
Great.
And it's just a bit of an encouragement. I've been playing Magic for a long time. Very few games go by where I don't encounter some sort of conditions or interactions that I'm like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what happens here. It is a game with a lot of complexity, and that's what makes it fun, is you find yourself in all sorts of crazy scenarios. If you're playing at a shop, one of the things that exists there to help you is most shops have judges who you can get like certified at the whole thing. But like if you're playing at your pre-release, you could just raise your hand and be like, call for a judge, and they'll come. You could be like, what happens here? Yeah. But like even playing amongst friends, like I like more often than not in a game, one of us will be Googling how does this work together. And like I said, I've been playing since the 90s. So the fact that I've got that much experience and I still have to do it, like this game is all about finding things you didn't know worked the specific way. Get kind of lost in the sauce a little bit. It's part of the fun.
Okay, well, I love it. Well, let's get lost in some of the other notable characters that we would want to cover here. Wade, who do you want to start with for the other notable characters that we should mention when we talk about the Limit Break
we got
deck?
to talk about Zach Fair. Without Zach, there is no Cloud, right? And so I am struck by this, not just because Zach is one of my favorite characters, because he's just fun and cheerful. I like him. I used to think I was Cloud. Now I feel like I'm more Zach. Anyway, it says that Zach Fair enters with a +1/+1 counter on it. But this is what was really interesting. You can sacrifice Zach, and target creature you control gains indestructible until the end of turn, which is so cool because in the game, Zach sacrifices himself on behalf of Cloud so that Cloud can go. And then with his kind of dying words, he says to Cloud, "You're my living legacy. Go forward." And he gives him the Buster Sword, and that's how Cloud ends up with the Buster Sword.
No pressure, Cloud.
No pressure at all. I mean, what the weight of this on his shoulders. I think that's such a cool thing because Zach is really all about that legacy sort of thing, perseverance. I did a whole lecture series on Jewish mysticism and all the namings of these characters, and there's one piece of the Tree of Life in Jewish mysticism that refers to Netzach or Zach, and it's about perseverance and kind of the refusal of fate as it is, which is a really interesting thing. So we see that in the card here. I love that idea of sacrificing this character to really add a boost to another one. Am I reading that card right, Nick?
You are, and there's a part you didn't mention that's even more thematically appropriate. Zach Fair bequeaths the equipment he has equipped to whoever he makes indestructible.
Oh, snap!
So if Zach Fair has the Buster Sword on him and you sacrifice him to protect someone else, not only does he give them the +1/+1 counter, but he also gives them the equipment immediately and you don't have to like re-equip it.
So cool.
My gosh, I love that.
It's great. It's very like I said earlier, so cool. They absolutely crush it on these sets to like marry the mechanics and the lore of the world that they're in like so well.
So stinking cool. I love that so much.
Like to talk again deeper mechanics, he costs 1 mana, which means you almost certainly can have him out early when you draw him. So he is out there before Cloud ever hits the battlefield.
Oh, that's awesome.
So you have time to like build him up to get an equipment on him and then make this, literally play out some of the plot through those mechanics. Yeah.
That is so cool. Thank you for mentioning that. That I'm hyped to relive that experience and that trauma of sacrificing Zach to boost Cloud again and again.
Well, who are we sacrificing next?
Yeah, who are we sacrificing? Well, Aerith. Aerith is next on this list. And I love what they're doing with Aerith here. She has lifelink, which makes sense because she, at least in my playthrough, she was my like healing sort of specialist over here. And so she has lifelink, which is going to continue to give you some life as you're playing through. And then raise is her ability at the beginning of your end step. If you gained life this turn, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And if you gained 7 or more life this turn, return that card to the battlefield instead. Now, this is so interesting because yes, she's a healer, but one of the things that Aerith is known for is her tragic death in the game. And people like me always tried to find ways to bring her back. In fact, in the earliest days of the internets, I would get on discussion boards and create these step-by-step tutorials for how you could resurrect and revive Aerith. It was completely a lie because I was 14 years old and I was a jerk. But that was what I tried to do.
He's a mercenary with a troubled past.
That was me.
Amazing.
That was me. I'm self-actualized now. I laugh like Zach now. But I do love that there's this nod of lifelink. She's connected to the planet. She is returning people from the grave, even if she can't or may not be able to return from the grave herself. We'll find out in part 3.
I think that you explained the card and the connection well. I think let's move on to the next one. What are the other? You think there's a couple more characters you want to make sure we cover, and let's knock them out.
I think that there's probably a strong overlap between the Magic the Gathering community and people that love Vincent. So I feel like we got to talk about Vincent. Vincent is just like this incredible character. He is asleep in a coffin in the basement of a mansion in Cloud's hometown. He's a former Turk, meaning he used to work for Shinra, but to atone for his sins, which really gave rise to Sephiroth, he is now in this coffin. And so here, he also, as a result of some of those experimentations, has this ability to transform into these giant monsters of chaos, right? And I think that this is pretty evident in the card. He's called Vincent Vengeful Atoner. And it says that he's a menace. What does that mean? He's a menace.
So a creature with menace has to be blocked by at least 2 creatures. So he requires multiple people to stop him. A single creature is not even allowed to block Vincent. So he demands extra attention, pulls some threat maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, you actually fight against a transformed Vincent when you first meet him. And in that meeting, it is you and your entire party fighting him solitary. And this really makes this card really cool because it says that one of his attacks is chaos. Whenever Vincent deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to each other opponent if Vincent's power is 7 or greater. So this is like a widespread splash attack, if I'm reading that right.
Yeah, that's gonna end some games pretty quickly.
Oh, man, so cool.
Once you're over that 7 threshold on Vincent, he's gonna go from being because again, if we harken back to what menace means, if I have a lot of power on my Vincent, but you all have a bunch of creatures, but our 4th player doesn't, the 4th player might not even be able to block him if he's only got 1 creature. So it lets Vincent like find a way through, connect the damage, and then when chaos triggers, that damage hits everyone regardless.
Interesting.
And he kind of goes crazy.
So just to be clear here, every time one or more of your creatures are dealing damage to a player, you're going to boost Vincent 1/1, right?
Yeah.
Oh, man. So, I mean, we got to be aggressive here, and that's boosting Vincent. Once he hits 7, it's pretty much over. It obliterates the line. That's awesome. Because at that point, oh my gosh, like I didn't even realize this. If he's dealing combat damage at 7, that's 7, and then 7 on all of the others? Holy crap, that is
minimum
nuts.
Is 21 to the table.
That
divided up. So like you can see how he gets out of pocket in a hurry.
Out of control. Chaos. That's what that is.
Exactly. And that's without any of the equipment and the gear that we've talked about earlier that like are maybe more valuable for like our clouds and stuff.
Oh my gosh.
You pop certain types of equipment on him, make him harder to stop, harder to kill, do more damage. All these things, you can see where he gets to be quite the finisher.
Okay.
Pretty quickly.
Holy crap. I want Vincent in my team immediately. We've got to talk about Sephiroth Fallen Hero before we move on to the next
I was going to say, I think we've been looking at this deck with clouded eyes. Is there a character that might help us to see them with eyes unclouded?
Sephiroth Fallen Hero. And I love that we've got the fires of Nibelheim behind him. Sephiroth is iconic, right? Everybody knows him, mainly for his gigantic Masamune sword and for just his arc and the way that he kind of toys with Cloud and seeks to manipulate him. There's 2 attacks that are really interesting here. First, Genova cells. Whenever Sephiroth attacks, you may put a cell counter on targeted creatures. Until the end of the turn, each modified creature you control has a base power and toughness of 7 and 5. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but what I do know is that Sephiroth has this ability to control those with some Genova cells like Cloud. And there are scenes throughout Rebirth, for example, where Cloud is just almost like a husk doing Sephiroth's bidding because he bears those Genova cells, something that's really going to come to fruition in part 3. So I think that that's pretty cool. Am I reading that right? Like, is there anything you would say about that, Nick?
Yeah, so basically he shortcuts our characters. So like we've talked with some of these other characters, they want to get to 7 power. If Sephiroth's out there, he pops a cell counter on him. It's like, bang, you're 7-5 now. Done. Like we don't have to build up. I'm gonna pull the strings here and activate this sort of latent power.
Could he do that to Vincent?
Oh yeah.
And like that's gonna shoot him up to 7?
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh. So if you have Sephiroth and Vincent, like just make Sephiroth boost Vincent and Vincent does game over. Holy crap.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
Sephiroth is really strong in this deck because so many of those iconic characters care about 7 power.
Yeah.
And Sephiroth, it's like, forget all the equipment, forget all the other spells and stuff we might do it. You're 7-5 now, done.
That's crazy.
Go knock them out.
In Rebirth, there's this incredible scene. The first time that Sephiroth really takes over Cloud, like it's clear, it's in chapter 9, the Gongaga chapter. Cloud gets taken over by the spirit of Sephiroth and he becomes a totally different person. He is slashing at other soldiers and stuff, and he even takes the Sephiroth stance. So he takes on Sephiroth's, and notice this, Sephiroth has a 7-5 on his own card, so he's placing his own power scale onto this creature. That is beautiful. I cannot wait for that. The second attack here, I got to mention this. It's called the Reunion. So you're going to sacrifice a modified creature and return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Can you explain exactly what's happening there from a gameplay standpoint, and then I'll talk about the story?
Yeah, so that is an ability that you can only activate from the graveyard. So once Sephiroth has died, you then can pay 3 and then sacrifice a modified creature. A modified creature is anything with a counter on it, anything with an equipment, or anything that's been enchanted by an aura.
Oh, wow.
So basically some sort of thing has been added to that creature. So think, for example, Sephiroth's cell counters count towards that. If a creature has a cell counter on it, that's a modified creature. So Sephiroth can basically create a minion, die, and then use that minion to come back into play, to take its place, basically steal its life, sort of.
That's so I'm really struggling with this. Like, you sacrifice the creature and then bring him back in play. Why would you do that? Exactly.
So it just depends, right? So certain creatures are more valuable than others, depending on the opponents you're facing, depending on what you have in play, depending on what's in your hand. Sephiroth's ability requires, like, the Genova cells. He has to be in play for those cells to do anything, which sounds relatively lore accurate. They don't just do it on their own, but he activates them specifically. So if he puts a cell counter on a creature and then he dies, next time that creature goes to attack, it's not a 7-5. It's whatever the good Lord made it. But he has to see that attack, and when he sees that attack, then it triggers that Genova cell ability of him. So sometimes there's a situation where I might have a lot of modified creatures. I can afford to spare one to sacrifice it, but what I really don't have is that 7 power. So I'll sacrifice, my professional face breaker, looking at some of the other cards in the deck. But in exchange, I'll get a Sephiroth back, which might have a much bigger impact on the board.
That's what it is. You sacrifice. So I was confused about the modifier there. Return this card. This card means Sephiroth card.
Yep.
Correct.
Okay, because I was like, you're sacrificing and then you're just putting it back.
Yeah.
But it's returning.
Sometimes you do want to do that, but
Okay, so that is exactly it. So in the game, Sephiroth died 5 years before the events of Final Fantasy VII. And even though he's like around, Aerith says this in Rebirth, it's not so much that he's alive as much as he is around. So he's able to manipulate anyone that has some exposure to Genova cells. And so he's able to kind of manipulate that. But his goal is those with Genova cells, he is preparing a reunion. And they're all heading back to this one place that is going to be revealed in part 3. And when they gather, he returns through that reunion. He is looking to reconstruct himself from the live stream where he currently exists
There you go.
to come back. And that is so freaking cool that they were able to do this with this card. Like, that's a huge reveal for part 3. And like, they're doubling down on it. I love that.
It's so, 'cause I love hearing about the story from you because I don't know these things.
Yeah.
Like I know like One Winged, I know some of the big hits. But that like idea that he can
Oh my God.
put that cell counter on a creature and then when he dies, he can reanimate himself because he's kind of laid those plans.
That's so
beforehand.
stinking cool,
Yeah,
man.
really
like
cool.
I'm excited. I'm excited about that card and Vincent, maybe more than any others.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Well, let's talk about some other cards and decks that we're excited about. We have 2 more decks that we need to kind of get through if everybody's feeling good.
I feel great. Let's do it.
So Counter Blitz is our next deck. The next deck on our list is Counter Blitz with its commander, TIDUS or
I'm not saying it.
TIDUS.
Some people call him TIDUS, you know, like the games where his name is voiced. But I grew up on TIDUS.
TIDUS or
His name is
TIDUS.
actually his Christian name is TIDUS.
His Christian name is TIDUS.
I just always assumed it was Titus because
His friends called him TIDUS.
Okay, that makes sense.
If you call him
call him
TIDUS,
Titus.
you're not his friend. You just know him.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, he has a subtext, which is that he's Yuna's guardian. So tell us about the name of the deck, Counter Blitz. Why would it be named Counter Blitz? And what is the story of TIDUS to you? And Yuna, by extension, because he's her guardian, so there's relevance in it there. So why Counter Blitz? Who is this guy?
Final Fantasy X is the story of a pilgrimage, a spiritual sacred pilgrimage to go and defeat an entity known as Sin. Sin is this beast that kind of awakens every 10 years, and a summoner must go to address this thing. So they go to all of these temples, they go on this pilgrimage, and as they're going, they are accompanied by guardians. And so this is the kind of sacred journey of Yuna, who is the summoner that you're going to follow around in this. However, you take control of TIDUS. TIDUS is not from around here, so to say. He's from a place called Xanarkand, which, according to Yuna and her companions, was destroyed years and years and years, like eons ago, right? So TIDUS, the game starts out and you are a professional athlete in a sport called blitzball, which is kind of like underwater soccer. It's in a giant sphere and you're swimming around and it's like soccer, water polo, all combined into one. And so it's interesting because he's not a hero. He's not necessarily a warrior. He is like a quarterback. He's like an athlete. In fact, he's got this move or this action in the game called cheer, where you are cheering on your teammates, okay? Like, you got to think of TIDUS as a team captain. And so throughout this game, TIDUS joins up with Yuna, is adopted as one of her guardians, and really sets a whole new tone and vibe for this kind of solemn and somber journey that would otherwise end in kind of tragedy in a lot of ways. So,
Well, let's talk about our cardboard journey as we explore the deck a little bit here. Nick, you described this deck as he kind of cheers on and helps all the characters around him. And so he likes to help the team, and the team is what will eventually bring you to victory. And that sounds pretty accurate based on what we found out from Wade. Talk to us about the mechanics of this deck. What type of deck is it, and how does the game represent kind of the spirit of that story?
Yeah, it's a deck all about synergy. It uses very specifically like a tactile sense. It creates counters, which in Magic are just some form of marker placed on a card, like we talked about with Sephiroth and the Limit Break deck. He puts a Genova Cell counter on it. This deck really likes counters of any shape and form they come in. So, for example, +1/+1 counters are kind of our most common one, but even things like lore counters on our summons, which I know we haven't talked about yet, but like pretty much any type of card that can put a counter on a thing, TIDUS or TIDUS is going to get very excited about, because then he can then redistribute those, move them around. Kind of think of it, like you said, he's a team captain. He's orchestrating the attack. He's moving the ball around. He's finding the open man, that kind of thing. And then when he does that, he gets to amplify those abilities. He makes everyone stronger than they would be independently. So this is a deck all about synergy, finding, kind of assembling these individual pieces that are greater than the sum of their parts.
I love that. So you said earlier that in our pre-show that the type of player who might enjoy this deck is someone who likes to set up elaborate strategic plays. It's a deck for people who like teamwork, synergy, and harmony, things that kind of work together. Wade, how does that fit with the way that the characters interact with each other? And Nick mentioned something called summons and sagas that we haven't touched on yet that are an important part of this deck, from my understanding. Talk to us a little bit, too, about summons, and then we'll let Nick talk about how they represent in the game here.
What's really interesting is that TIDUS, from the very beginning, he starts out as a blitzball player, but what he does with teams, leading them to victory, he begins working with a very podunk, kind of really bad, blitzball team, the Besaid Aurochs, right? Think of who's a bad team. No, we're not going to do that. But he leads them to victory, right? And then he comes to this group of guardians in the game that are on this really kind of sad journey, because at the end of these pilgrimages, tragic things always happen if you're successful. And that's just kind of the way it goes. But he brings a levity and a lightheartedness that allows them not only to go through this journey with positivity, but to completely change the outcome of destiny here, so that the tragic things that would ordinarily happen are totally subverted and they break the cycle forever. So to hear that this is a game about companions and being able to utilize your entire team, this really harkens to this. Now, the other thing is, as we can see from the secret commander, Yuna, Grand Summoner, which makes total sense because, she's the other primary protagonist for this game.
Okay, talk to us about how each deck has a secret or second. Reintroduce the concept for us and talk about how Yuna is the second commander for us real quick.
We know that she's the second commander because she's got 3 colors, and they are the same as the primary commander, who is TIDUS in this. So here, both of them have green, white, and blue. Am I right?
You are correct.
Hurrah! So anyway, that's how we know. And I am so excited about the Yuna stuff because she is the Grand Summoner, which really kind of plays into her whole arc in the game. As a summoner, she summons monsters. This is a classic class in Final Fantasy lore. And in this game, you go temple to temple, collecting new summons that you're going to then employ in battle before you take on the final summon, which is going to be kind of the end of the game or whatever. And so the thing that's really striking to me about this deck is that there are 4 summons, more than any of the other commander decks. And so there is an emphasis on these summons. Summons in Magic, if you watched our tutorial video, they are represented as sagas. And sagas are going to be multi-phase, multi-stage power attacks that are really going to do some cool things each round that they're in play. Is that accurate? Am I okay there, Nick?
Yeah, you're right on.
Okay.
In traditional Magic, up to this point, sagas have always been not also creatures. They're these temporary things that, like you said, progress, change, grow, and then eventually cease to exist. What they did, again, marrying the mechanics of Magic to the world of Final Fantasy, is there are summons. They represent big splashy entrances, powerful moves. They attack, they do damage, and then they're gone. Just
That's
as quickly
exactly
as
how
they
it is in 10. They come in, they do their damage, their attacks for a little bit, and then they are gone. Either they are defeated or they are whisked away into the far plane, as it were, here, or the graveyard in the game. Now, with Yuna, her card is like lore. It's chock full of lore, and I love it. So I want to read a little bit of this. Her attack is Grand Summon, and you're going to add 1 mana of any color. When you next cast a creature spell this turn, that creature enters with 2 additional +1/+1 counters on it. So let's stop there for a second. What exactly is happening there? And then I can comment on the lore.
Yeah. So this is a bit of a fourth wall break. So in the history of Magic, the creature cards used to be called summon creatures. That was like the specific type line of them. So like any creature we play in Magic, in the lore of it, is we're summoning those creatures to our aid. So her generating mana and then letting you summon creatures with bonus power is like a perfect harmony between these two very like similar concepts, but kind of bridging that gap a bit. So she helps you generate additional mana to play bigger cards. And then when you do that, when you play the cards using that mana, or just when you cast your next creature spell, you don't have to use her mana specifically. It comes in with extra power.
Oh, that's perfect.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So it really just it reemphasizes that that summoner sort of thing. Now, the secondary piece to a summoner is that they are also those who send. So if someone dies in this world of Spira, as it's called, they have to be sent by a summoner to what's known as the far plane. Because if you die and your soul or your spirit is not sent, it begins to become vengeful and resentful because it does not want to go to the far plane. And what happens is they manifest as a fiend or a monster who's then going to wreak havoc on the world. And so it's important for a summoner to show up to towns, usually that sin has devastated, but in any kind of place, to perform this almost like burial funeral rite in order to send the spirits off to the far plane properly. Now, on the card, it's interesting. It says, whenever another permanent you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, if it had 1 or more counters on it, you may put that number of +1/+1 counters on the targeted creature at this point. Tell us a little bit about what's happening there, and then I can talk about the parallels.
Yeah, so it's a really cool ability, especially with the summons, because the way that the sagas work in Magic, those summons accumulate lore counters, which is how we track what stage they are, how far along that like experience they are. So when they leave the battlefield, they're going to have 3, 4, maybe even 5 lore counters on them.
Wow.
So if Una sees that happen, she's going to take 5 +1/+1 counters and put them onto another creature of ours.
Wow.
So it's this kind of way of almost like Aikido, like harvesting that energy of, even though it's headed for the graveyard, that's not a problem. That's actually a benefit for us here. We're going to end up juicing our board even more because we had this summon come in, do some stuff, but then die. And like the dying is actually part of that. It makes sense that in the world they work almost kind of like a psychopomp, where it's this passage from life to death. Her card is very much that. It ushers cards from the battlefield to the graveyard, and by doing that makes everyone better.
Oh, I love that. Because it goes perfectly in with the lore. Another card that kind of goes along with her is the enchantment Summoner's Sending. And this is kind of what I was talking about with the sending of souls. At the beginning of your end step, you may exile a targeted creature card from a graveyard. And if you do, you'll create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying and put a +1/+1 counter on it if the exiled card's mana value is 4 or greater. So I have no idea what that means, but I know that transitioning it from graveyard to exiled and having some enchantment boosts is cool. So maybe talk to us about what's going on in that card.
Yeah, it really is. It is the nature of the summoner, as you told me in the world of Final Fantasy X. We're basically saying, okay, you're in the graveyard. Like we talked about some of the other decks, they can play out of the graveyard. This one's not as interested in that. This one is, however, still using that graveyard as a resource. We're just doing it differently. So instead of trying to reanimate our things with necromancy, things like that, we're putting them at peace. We're saying, not only are you dead now, but we're going to put you in exile, which is much harder to pull things out of in Magic.
I love that. I love the idea that this is, they could have easily said, we're going to make her a necromancer, but they're like, no, that's not her story. And it's about finding that peace and still utility, even in death. I love that. Another card that was really cool, and we've already mentioned this beast, but it's Sin Unending Cataclysm. I like it because it is, it says, as Sin enters, remove all counters from any number of artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. Sin enters with X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is twice the number of the counters removed this way. When Sin dies, put its counters on a target creature you control, then shuffle this card into its owner's library.
Because he just comes back 10 years later. Oh, man.
Yeah, and it comes back 10 years later, right?
Yep.
I think that's pretty cool because you can't really vanquish Sin until really the end. And so that's how it is. Otherwise, it's just going to keep on coming back. That's a really cool lore bit. Now, beyond that, I really don't know what it does, but it looks cool.
It is very cool. A lot of Magic lore has different gods and all kinds of things in play, and a lot of those, when they would die, instead go back into your deck in some way or shape or form, to kind of emulate that idea of immortality, where it's like they can die, but they don't really. They're in a habit of not staying dead, because they're these all powerful creatures. As far as his other ability, this is again kind of like some of the other cards we've looked at. This is going to end games in a hurry, because he absorbs the power that these other cards have kind of amassed. So all of the counters that are on all of our cards, he consumes them, and then gets double that added to his power. And the important thing is, it's not just cards that you control; it's just all counters from any number of artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. So if your opponents have a bunch of counters, you can just eat them and gobble them up, and now your Sin is very, very large and very, very scary.
You can take them from your opponents too?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, snap. I mean, that's killer.
Yeah.
Literally.
So it kind of represents that like nexus of this power. And then beyond that, when he dies, he bequeaths it to a creature you control before he shuffles it back in. So not only do you create this massive well of power, but then he passes it along before he leaves play.
I love that you get to try and recreate your favorite moments from the games, the video games, in the way that you play and win the game of Magic, especially with these Commander decks where you get to they do tell a story of the characters that come in, and you kind of create this little micro story in the way that you play. So for Final Fantasy fans, I can definitely see how that would be engaging, and it's very cool that the cards are interesting from just the Magic perspective as well. So I love that. What other characters do we need to mention on our way to our final deck?
Well, I think we got to talk about Seymour. Seymour is a primary antagonist in the game aside from Sin. And he is interesting because he's enigmatic, but he's also very charismatic. You kind of want to... He's just got this personality where people are going to follow him and stuff. And I find that he is incredibly powerful, but very subtly so. And that only grows over the course of the game. On his card, it says at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to Maester Seymour's power on another target creature you control. It also talks about monstrosities, and I don't really understand monstrosities here. So could you maybe talk a little bit about that, and I'll talk a little bit more about Seymour.
Yeah, so monstrosity is a keyword in Magic, which is just kind of, there's a big glossary of keywords. We've talked about some like lifelink or haste, things like that must confer some sort of ability. Monstrosity is a little bit less of a common one, but basically monstrosity means that if you pay that cost, so for Seymour it's 2 green, 3 of any color, he then becomes monstrous. So he gets X +1/+1 counters, where in his case, that's the number of counters among creatures you control. So one of the things that it's thematically shows up in some other Magic cards is the idea of like religion and conversion. So his distribution of counters with that first ability is that like proselytizing conversion.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And then the secondary ability is him kind of harvesting the benefit of that. Because first thing is he's distributing these counters. And then the second thing he does is he's drawing power based on the amount of counters that have been spread around. So the more counters that are in play, the more he's able to like convert and spread and whisper in people's ears.
Wow.
The more powerful he will be when he like reveals his true form, sort of thing.
That is so interesting because in the game, he really does serve as this almost like corrupt priest sort of character who is spreading lies about what's going on in the world. And he's really just trying to accrue all of these followers. In fact, he's got some diehard followers that you have to fight against multiple times throughout the game. But again, as he's like absorbing all of this and accruing more power, he does eventually unveil his final forms. And that's really wild. That's awesome.
I think it's time to talk about the final deck.
I think so too. I'm excited about this one, and I know that a lot of people are.
Well, last but certainly not least is our Scions and Spellcraft deck, which, Wade, I'm really excited to hear about what parts of this game they pulled for this, because this is one of the most expansive games in the franchise too. So I imagine there was some difficulty in figuring out exactly what they wanted to do. The commander for this is Y'shtola, Knights Blessed. Perfect.
Right.
So tell us, what game is this from? Tell us about Y'shtola and the kind of story that they're really maybe going for out of this game, because I think this one might have been a little trickier for them to design around.
Well, Final Fantasy XIV is the deck. And if you have not heard of Final Fantasy XIV, let me tell you, it is the critically acclaimed MMORPG, Final Fantasy XIV, with an expanded free trial, which you can play through the entirety of A Realm Reborn, Heavensward, Stormblood, and more, all the way up to whatever current level we are at currently. It is kind of a meme across all of the Final Fantasy XIV fandom, and so you got to get that out there. So Final Fantasy XIV is an MMO RPG. I love Final Fantasy XIV. I've been playing since day one of its PlayStation, I guess, 3 debut back in the day. And I followed along a little bit on PC, but I'm not much of a PC gamer. I certainly wasn't one 10 years ago. But Y'shtola is, she was there on day one of Final Fantasy XIV, this game that has been going on for 13 years and still going strong. Y'shtola is classically a black mage. She does destructive magic damage. But she also deals with things like death and a little bit of necromancy, but not too much, I guess. She
some
really
light necromancy.
Just a little.
Just some light necromancy.
A little. She dabbles, you know.
It's more of a hobby.
And so, like, it makes perfect sense that she would be the commander of this deck. She is an incredibly strong character, but from the beginning, where the world was ending, to the end, where it perpetually is ending in every expansion, she's kind of this steadfast link to some of that salvation. Always the one that is bolstering your character for whatever tasks may await. So there we go. We'll get into some of the lore bits as we move through, but Y'shtola is an all-timer.
Nick, you said this deck wants to cast spells that aren't necessarily creature spells to do damage. So some wizards, some spell crafting, some mage action going on here with a deck that just wants to use spells to do its damage and its bidding, not as much with the creature department. There are certainly creatures in the deck, from what I understand, but what it wants to do is do cool, powerful spells here. Tell us a little bit about how that plays out and how it connects to the story here.
Yeah, so the creature in this deck, and you see this true with a lot more. So the archetype would be a spell slinger deck. That's kind of common parlance in the Magic world. Decks that like to cast lots of magical, like fireballs, lightning bolts, counter spells, all sorts of things like that. Which is very similar to like some of the black mage type lane for FF14. The creatures in this deck really serve more to have the abilities that they have rather than their power and toughness. Like with Y'shtola, for example, it's not really worth it for her to hit anybody. She doesn't get any benefit from that. She does some damage. It might be relevant sometimes, but she's really there because she's adept at magic. And so whenever we're using our magical abilities, she's harvesting that energy from other people, that kind of redirecting. We deal damage when we cast our spells, and we heal some when we cast our spells. So she likes to see magic get slung around, different ways of kind of a different vector, if you will, of putting pressure on your opponents.
Okay, so you've said that this deck is for the type of player who wants to react and respond a little bit. And maybe if you like casting spells a little more than you like having creatures and minions, then this could be a deck that's interesting for you. Wade, hearing about those mechanics and how it connects to the broader Final Fantasy XIV story, where does this land for you? And then, like every deck has that secret commander, that second commander that you can choose to play with. Who might that be for this deck? So how does this connect?
So, for me, as I'm thinking through this, because it's an MMO, this game is very reactive based on what's happening around you in the world. It is both player versus environment, but it's got some player versus player, and it's got a lot of collaboration with other players. And so much, anytime you're in a raid or something like that, you are reacting and responding to what other players are doing, or more likely not doing. Guilty, but also I'm a tank, so take care of me, healers. So you're constantly trying to react and mitigate. And so it makes sense to me that this is a very reactionary deck, if it's going to follow that same sort of thing. The secondary commander, by my looks of things, I'm going to say it's Graha Tia, Scion Reborn, because Graha has the same 3 colors as Y'shtola. And so that's pretty cool. Graha is a fan favorite. So we have 2 cat wizards. We have cat warlock, Y'shtola, and cat wizard, Graha Tia. That's what it says on the card. I love both of these characters. And Graha is, like I said, a fan favorite, probably the most cosplayed character in Final Fantasy XIV, maybe besides Emmett Selk. But what I love about both of these characters is that they really are about augmenting those that are around you. For example, Graha has lifelink, and then also throw wide the gates, which means whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you may pay X life, where X is that spell's mana value. And if you do, create a 1/1 colorless hero creature token and put X +1/+1 counters on it. Do this only once each turn. I love that because all of these kind of characters in this game that you play alongside the NPCs that are on your team, they really are support characters for you because you are the hero in Final Fantasy XIV. And so it seems like there's a lot of support in this deck, a lot of reactions and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know, it's kind of an interesting thing, not really knowing much about how you would even play this deck.
Yeah, Nick, this deck plays very differently, I think, than the other 3 decks that we have discussed previously. Will you just give us a general overview of especially blue as a color type and really blue and white together, and why this kind of deck would play differently and what makes it so distinct from the other decks?
Yeah, so there's a theme, especially with both of our commander and our alternate commander, of life gain and life loss. That's one of the most unique parts compared to our other decks. We're going to gain that life, but we're also going to spend it as a resource. Like with Graha Tia's ability, we can pay life of any amount up to that spell's mana value. So sometimes if we're casting a big spell, it may cost us 5, 6, 7 life, which for a normal deck, that could be really damaging. But because we have lifelink and Y'shtola's ability, lets us gain life whenever we cast these spells. We're kind of creating this resource and then spending it and then refilling it and then spending it again to extract benefit. That's a very iconic, kind of lane for black in Magic specifically. Is a lot about sacrificing power. White's all about kind of healing and restoration. So when you have them together, it usually means we're both going to be able to generate it and we're going to be able to spend it, cool. Which is kind of cool. And then when you mix blue in the mix, blue is kind of the iconic color of wizards and spell casting and, counter spell abilities, all kinds of things like that. Drawing cards, which is in Magic kind of equates to knowledge. The more cards I have in my hand, the more things I understand. to kind of translate the mechanics of the game to the flavor and the lore of the game. So yeah.
Oh, very interesting. That's interesting to me because one of the primary themes in two of the expansions, Shadowbringers and Endwalker, is kind of the death of former worlds and the absorption of those worlds into some others. And so the question is, when one world dies or is gone, how is that salvaged in these new worlds, or how is there a way of salvation for those former worlds? That really comes to play in Endwalker, but certainly in Shadowbringers as well. Shadowbringers is where Graha Tia comes in, and he is part of kind of among the earliest worlds, I guess. But it just is really interesting that there is this death and life and absorption sort of flow to this.
Well, what other characters would be included here, knowing there's a million of them in the MMO, so they had to decide on a few. Who sticks out to you that you would want to mention, and kind of telling the story of this deck and helps us to explain the mechanics?
It's interesting because so many cards in this deck hearken to the idea that you can have different jobs, and so there are artifacts for dancers and reapers and all of the different jobs, really. So I mean, I think that it's cool that they kind of give a nod to your players' agency of being able to play in all of these different classes or job roles in the game. But what's most interesting, I think, to the fans of the game here are going to be characters like Hildebrand. Hildebrand is a side character in this game that is just beloved because of his zany, kind of goofy, almost mystery. I think he's called like a man of mystery at one point. But he is the Manderville gentleman, okay? And here's what his card says. It is an instant. It's interesting because there's a creature and an instant here.
Yeah, tell us about that, Mace.
Can you explain this? Because this is kind of a hard card to read, but I love the character.
This is a template we haven't seen. It's basically a two-parter. So at any point, if we have Hildebrand in our hand, we can cast him as a creature for two mana, and then the right side of that text box is just what his creature is, right? So our creature tokens will get things. However, because he also is what's called an adventure spell, this harkens to the Eldraine set, if you want to get into the magic, but it basically was a fairy book, like fairy tale storybook kind of world. So they had this idea of two-part spells where it's think like Hero's Journey, Green Knight, something like that, where they have to go off and do something and then they return stronger.
Oh, interesting.
So adventure spells, basically, we can cast it, and when we cast Gentleman's Rise, which is his adventure component, we then create a zombie token, and then the card will go into exile, quote, on an adventure.
Okay.
And then we can, at any point later, we can cast it as a creature from exile, which we've talked about exile a little bit beforehand. It's hard to get things out. Some things, though, like adventure spells, can bring themselves out. So we'll create a zombie, and then later we can then also cast Hildebrand. Or if we need Hildebrand right now, we can just cast him straight up and skip the adventure part.
Oh, that's pretty cool. In the game, Hildebrand is like oftentimes missing and gone. You have to find him, and he's usually finding some kind of mystery to solve or whatever. But there's actually one where you meet zombie Hildebrand, which is a really cool side quest.
Incredible.
And it's like, is he dead? Is he alive? And like, oh man, it's so cool. So I love that that's just a subtle nod to the lore of the game, the story of the game. That's great.
Yeah. And then on top of it too, whenever he dies, we can cast him out of the graveyard for the adventure part. So it's this kind of, he gets lost in different ways. He gets lost in exile, he gets lost in the graveyard, but we can find him again.
That's funny because there's several times in the game in between expansions when you think he's dead and then he just comes back. So I love that. More opportune time. That's terrific. Okay. Other characters that people are just, I've got to mention Emmett Selk of the third seat. So Emmett Selk is the beloved antagonist, maybe pseudo protagonist, depending on the way you look at things. he is among the most charismatic villains in the entire series. He's hard to dislike because he makes an incredibly compelling point. He comes from a world that was destroyed. And so he has a chip on his shoulder, to put it lightly. And so it's interesting that on his card, it says spells you cast from your graveyard cost 2 mana less to cast. Whenever one or more opponents lose life, you may cast target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. If that spell would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. Do this only once per turn. Talk to us a little bit about how this card works.
Yeah, so he is all about kind of reclaiming lost knowledge. If we think about spells and magic, especially instants and sorceries being this kind of concept of knowledge. Normally in magic, when we cast an instant or a sorcery, it does its effect and then it goes to the graveyard and that's it. You'll see a lot of cards that can bring back creatures, but sometimes it's tricky to bring back a spell because again, it's like there's nothing physical there to exhume. But it's kind of twofold. One, your spells out of the graveyard are cheaper, so he loves spells that can self-cast. So, for example, Hildebrand, we just looked at. When he dies, you may cast it from your graveyard as an adventure until the end of your next turn. So basically, if we have Emmett Selk, we can cast Gentleman's Rise for 1 black mana total. We don't have to pay the 2 because we get the cost reduction, and then Hildebrand lets us cast again. But beyond that, anytime opponents lose life, Emmett Selk lets us pull more spells out of the graveyard. So this idea that as people are dying around him, he's drawing more power, finding other ways to exert influence.
Wow.
It's really cool.
That is really cool. One of my favorite things in the game is that when there's 2 phrases that Emmett Selk says to your character. Number 1, he says to you, "Don't squander it, this legacy that I leave you." And then the other, which is probably his most iconic, is remember us that we once lived. And so this idea of really playing with the graveyard and that sort of thing is just like, it's a really cool thing because it's like, I love what you said. The one, how did you exactly say it? The restorer of lost knowledge or something like that. It was so poetic.
The idea that we're gonna have to look back at the tape because things just kind of fall out of my head sometimes.
It's just brilliance that oozes from you, Nick. It's really nice.
I can't help it. Sometimes it comes naturally to people like me. I guess
it really does, doesn't it? Yeah, it's so good. But like, I mean, Emmett Selk, that is his thing. He is fighting for the remembrance of this world that was lost, and how that comes up in this game is just so stinking cool. And that remembrance begins with I want to inflict the same pain that I have endured on others. And so it begins from a very kind of sad state, but also a very revengeful state. And then it kind of evolves as you go through Shadowbringers and Endwalker as well. So I just, chef's kiss again, nod to the producers of this. They're just
you got to shout out the art there too, because
the art is
Magali Villeneuve's one of the greatest.
Say Magic's that name again.
Retinue. Magali Villeneuve is the artist.
Okay.
You got a ton of stuff that's incredible. Just did the Y'shtola, but it you don't miss. And
really doesn't. I mean, this is the art in this collection is just stunning. Just a final thing that I'm going to throw out here. We certainly have the job equipment, and I think that's really cool. But I would be remiss if I did not talk about the Relic of Legends. The Relic of Legends is the shield of the one and only Hoshafont Greystone. And Hoshafont was a hero in Heavensward. You meet him in the kind of intermediary things between A Realm Reborn and Heavensward. And he immediately becomes a favorite. And then in a very heroic act, he protects you with his shield. His shield is pierced by this beaming ray of laser light, and it goes straight through him. And he has this incredibly tragic death. And on the card, you've got this Relic of Legends. It is his shield that's been burned through there. And I mean, you want to bring a tier to a Final Fantasy 14 players. I mean, talk about Archifant. And so here, the artifact does this. It adds 1 mana of any color. You tap an untapped legendary creature you control, add 1 mana of any color. Tell us a little bit about that. It looks pretty straightforward, but how would you play this one?
Yeah, so this one's actually interesting because it's a reprint. So there are a number of cards in these decks that are bespoke, created for Final Fantasy, the Magic the Gathering crossover set specifically. But then there's a large chunk of them that are existing Magic cards with new art, new flavor text that kind of aligns them into the Final Fantasy universe.
Okay.
So this is what in Commander we would call a mana rock. So as you're playing your land every turn, that's good, but that kind of sets you at a specific pace, right? If I'm going to play 1 land per turn, then that's all I get. Sometimes we want to go a little faster, and so that's where things like mana rocks come into play, where I can pay 3 mana, put this down, and this is basically a land. I can tap it for a mana of any color. That's its primary ability. Most 3 mana rocks have something else they do. So this one, for example, lets us untap legendary creatures to draw even more mana. So it really connects in with this idea of like life is a resource a little bit. Like we have this concept, like, your Stoll is a warlock, warlock. That's her flavor text or her type line. This idea of let's leverage our creatures, because like we discussed earlier, the creatures in this deck don't really care about attacking. That's not really what most of them are good at. So if they're tapped, that doesn't really hurt us as long as we don't need to block. So it kind of lets us expend our creatures in a different way rather than attacking to generate more mana to cast more spells.
Yeah.
Because we want to be casting as many sorceries and instants as we can in order to kind of trigger some of these other abilities.
Wow. Again, I mean, just the even though it's a reskin, it just so well kind of shows the impact and the legacy that this character has on you and your journey. There are a couple of other things, and like this deck is so interesting, but for the lore, it really demands that you've put in hundreds and hundreds of hours to really understand this deck. I do want to give some shout outs here. Ardbert, Warrior of Darkness. Just as you are the Warrior of Light, there was once a warrior and a entourage of darkness. And this is an interesting one because it looks like, if I'm looking at it correctly, it plays with this idea of white spells and black spells and kind of having an inverse effect in some ways, if I'm reading that correctly. So again, kind of cool stuff there. With that, just I don't know what else to say about that one, but that's cool. Good.
Does Ardbert have like a specific class?
He's kind of
maybe
a warrior.
missed some of the cutscenes. As you may,
It says
not a big cutscene watcher in Final Fantasy 14. Please do not like me up in the comments. I'm sorry.
Listen,
I'm just there for the
you
mining
are
and the
forgiven
crafting.
because my time with you in Final Fantasy 14 took me to one of the funnest raves I've ever been to in my life.
Time, right?
So what an iconic night. We took
The
all kinds of
dangerous
pictures. It was a dangerous night. It was fun. It was good times. So, yeah, he takes place in a lot of cutscenes. You wouldn't notice him otherwise. But also, fun story about this guy. He is the character that's in all of the trailers. So
I thought I recognized
it's like
him.
the Warrior of Darkness. Then it's like, oh, he's actually a character in here. I just thought that was an avatar for me, but that's kind of a neat thing. Estinian, let him be the last one we talk about. I could talk about Fandaniel and I could talk about Hermes, but Estinian is the one that most people, well, honestly, they thirst over. So we're going to talk about Estinian. He is a Dragoon. And Dragoons are awesome in the Final Fantasy world. You meet him in Heavensward, and In this game, his card says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you put a 1/1 counter on Astinian. It gains flying until the end of the turn. At the beginning of your second main phase, you draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of your opponents who were dealt combat damage by Astinian or a dragon this turn. Tell me a little bit about what's happening here. How would I read this, and when would I play it?
And so you may remember in Final Fantasy XIV ever playing with the Dragoon, and then you watch them jump in and then die immediately.
Yeah, sure.
And then everyone's like, oh, great, now we have to figure out how to get the Dragoon back in the middle of this fast fight, raid, whatever. That's pretty much exactly what we're doing here. He gets flying when you cast a spell. So think of our leap ability. Dragoon was my first class, so I did a lot of dying
Calling
in the
out
worst,
Dragoons. I love
the
it, though.
worst place ever. Yeah, just like, oh, what's that? Oh, you want to have to run through the boss to get to me? Yeah, great, I did that. So the first off, we get flying when we cast spells. So again, this deck wants us to be firing off spells left, right, and center. So Astinian harmonizes that really well. So he gets more power and gains flying. So he's getting vertical with it. The second part is, I can't read this as anything but a nod to Dragoon's suicidal tendencies.
Yeah.
Because the idea that because you did damage, which is kind of what we want to do, right? We're going to draw cards, which is good, but lose life, which is bad. But again, as we talked about, we're losing
funny.
life. It's a resource, right? The only point of life that matters in Magic is the last one. Everything else kind of doesn't really mean anything. Especially as we've seen with this deck, it's something we can spin. Astinian is a continuation of that theme. Like, if I've got plenty of life, paying 4 or 5 life to draw cards is like, I want cards. Cards are great. I like casting spells. I need cards to do that. So Astinian kind of is that I'm throwing myself into the mix. I'm going to take some hits as I'm dealing hits. Really just a true Dragoon.
I mean, so lore accurate.
You look so cool, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, he's doing, and then he just hits the ground like completely lifeless. It's like, yeah, okay, well, that tracks. Yeah. So
cast the res. Instant res.
Yeah, immediately getting in a group chat, like flaming the healers. It's like, no, that was
Why am I down? Why am I down? Because you're a Dragoon.
Healers are terrible in this raid. I've never flamed a healer. I've never done that. I healed when we played. Let the record show.
Let the record show. After you failed at Dragoon, you healed.
This is amazing. Nick, thank you.
God, this has been so helpful.
Happy to help.
And enlightening. So, Nick, as a Magic player, I think this is kind of the last question I have. Are you excited about these decks?
I'm pumped. For me, Magic is best enjoyed with people. Like the game for me is the interactive part.
Okay.
Commander's the format I play the most. Largely because it's social. So like if I'm playing you in a 1v1, I don't make any choices. We have to kill each other. That's our entire goal. But if the three of us are playing, now there's different angles, right? So it's like maybe Wade's getting kind of scary. So I'm like, Evan, like let's have a conversation about what he's doing over here. This is outrageous. We have to stop it. And so really like it's the part that makes Magic the best is the gathering part. Where you're getting together with your friends, you're talking, you're getting angry at them because they did something, you're flaming the healer in chat, so to speak. That kind of group effect is really hard to beat. And so anything that gets more people into the game, I think is really fun, and that brings in new blood who have different perspectives, play the game differently, is really cool. And plus these decks just really connect with iconic characters that people spend a lot of time with and really like are core to some people's cultural background. It's super cool to like get to see that expressed in a new format and just, get new art of all these stories and tales that people have gone from, the 17 polygons that was Cloud on PS1 to where we're at now.
Old Popeye Cloud.
He's all forearms. It's great. The sword's big. You need the forearms.
You do. You need them for the Buster
It's
sword.
the risk. You got to have it. It's essential. Nick, I'm super pumped.
I love what you said there. I mean, the most important part about Magic is that gathering part of it. Yeah, you can play on the mobile app and stuff, but there's something about sitting with somebody. Once I get these decks, we've got to sit down and play. I need to make a road trip over and like let's just make a weekend of it or whatever. But like that is what's so cool about this, and it's part of the reason why we're putting out all of these things, because we hope that you, the viewer, you are going to play with some friends, that you're going to pick up these cards, and you start out of love of Final Fantasy, but then like you just get to talk about this thing that you love over a fun game and stuff. So my biggest advice to everybody is, and I hope that I've been able to model this today, don't get frustrated when you don't understand something. Just ask questions of those that are more knowledgeable than you about it, and because the goal here is to have fun, to make connections, and to just really celebrate this thing. How cool is it that this iconic card game and this iconic video game series have come together in this way, and it's something that we can celebrate. So make it fun, and go find your people. Do the gathering, right?
I love it. Thanks, everybody.
Well, thank you so much for watching. We are delighted to have you on this journey with us. Remember, for all of your Magic content and Final Fantasy content, stay tuned to us this summer. And if you are interested in picking up our special Professor Noctis playmat that offers a bit of a tutorial piece, you can certainly do that with the link in the bio and description just beneath here. Thanks again for watching, everybody. And until next time, walk tall, my friends. See ya.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, Nick.
No problem.
Thanks to Husky by the Geek for our theme music. Thanks to Nick Smith for the interview and for our graphics. And most of all, thanks to you. This program is brought to you by viewers like you, and we really appreciate you. We hope that everything is going great in your world, and I so look forward to seeing you on our next episode. Bye-bye.